3 steps to awakening patients to committing to a care plan. And I really do mean this idea of awakening. They come in and so many people are fast asleep. Obviously, there's the ones that come in and they're hurting really bad. So that's kind of woken them up. So they're really willing to do anything, at least for the near term, to get started. But for many, they just don't hurt bad enough. They're not desperate enough. And then there's this challenge to the fact that when they find out insurance doesn't cover it, or there's a lot of out-of-pocket expense, even if there is some coverage, that their mind immediately shifts away from getting well to, I don't want to spend the time or the money. So how do we wake people up? It really is a matter of just getting people to have a revelation so they can make a revolution in their lives. As of the time that I'm actually filming this, we just had the second person, around us, parents of our kids, that their friends, that we found out to have breast cancer. And it's always, the bad kind, they tell us. So one is just kind of coming out of it. She's in remission, but still now about to go through all the chemo and radiation. And another one just discovered this. And in both cases, they were people that took pretty good care of themselves, from a worldly perspective. They didn't eat junk food. They're not overweight. They exercised. They had activities. Good people. They're both really nice women. And so it wasn't like they were cursed or stricken or somebody who just had the excuse, I suppose, of just eating McDonald's every day and just having their body fall apart as a result. So how does that work? If RFK does what he's trying to do and gets all of the red number 40 out of all the cereals, do we magically stop having cancer? And the answer comes back to this awakening again, that well before the diagnosis, well before the pain, well before the symptoms or the devastating death that will occur seemingly out of the blue for somebody that has a heart attack or some late stage pancreatic cancer and dies quickly thereafter. Before that, there's what I call the crossroads. There's a road you cross where you can't go back. It's too late. You hadn't looked into it early enough. So even if we do make changes to the healthcare delivery system and the food system, people still have to invest in their well-being far in advance of the point where they're now really concerned about it. My dad, we were going on vacation the next day. He was going out to get the mail and died on the front lawn, seemingly with no warning. But certainly we knew, from his spine and nervous system to his lifestyle, his weight, we knew there was a point where if we didn't do something about this, if he didn't finally commit and invest, something like this could happen. And by the time he would have been awakened to it, it was too late. So a commitment to a care plan, to closing, so to speak, to conversion, this is a really critical time. This is a point where we've got to take authority and be really good at getting people to, use this word again, awaken. And so if somebody says no, or, you don't take my insurance, or I didn't think it'd be that expensive, or I don't have any money, I don't have a job, but, the million and one excuses that we hear, while those excuses may be very real to them, what it still means is that they're sleeping, and I didn't do the job I needed to do to get them awakened. And so I always go back, and this is me, every time, 100% of the time, somebody does not have this necessary revelation and choose to commit to the care plan, I go back to the lab to figure out what could I have done better. So my communication, my conversions are in a constant state of evolution. Just as of this filming, I'm coming off of having gone through a conversion process with 60 people in my most recent practice. And I didn't get them all, as much as I'm the guy that teaches this, I'm the guy that studies this. I've got master's degrees and certifications and communication and everything that's necessary to understand people's psychology and get them to awaken and move. I didn't get everybody, but I never said, well, that was just a tough one, or she didn't have any money, or blame them. I could see sometimes, like, my staff or the people around me will say, oh yeah, she was this or he was that. Like, no. we have to look at ourselves. What could we have done different? What can we do better moving forward? Because we're going to run into these situations again and again and again. So as we get into these 3 steps, I want to talk about 3 steps today. We've got to get really good at this process of shaking people awake. And it literally is a shaking awake process. There's all kinds of science and psychology around this idea, but people literally need to be slapped awake, shaken awake, somehow dragged into their plans and their future for their own good, because people really are fast asleep and they're not hearing you. And a lot of these perceptions around, for example, why I don't have a diagnosis. I had somebody recently who came in and he did end up being awakened and choosing care, but man, was he tough. He was absolutely certain he did not have a problem. So despite the x-rays and despite some medical history, he was certain, I don't have an issue. Everything that is from my past has been healed, and I am fine. And so that's a tough one. So we could have just said, well, that was a guy that nobody can convert. But thankfully, we broke out a lot of the tools that we're going to share here, and he chose care. So you can never blame the people. So when we talk about this idea, everything revolves around 150 a week is the new $1 million practice. And the reason that's an important concept, it reminds me of Tim Ferriss's book on the 4-hour work week. So I don't only work 4 hours. I seemingly never stop working. I love what I do. I'm very passionate about it. My kids are older, so they don't need me or want me around as much. 2 out of 3 are out of the house already. And so I like to keep saving lives, helping chiropractors, and making a difference for God in this world. So I like to be going at it. But I love the 4-hour work week. And the reason I love that book is it's a principle. So he teaches a principle in that book where if you're working 40 hours instead of 4 hours, what you're doing is you're being lazy, which sounds contradictory, that you're being lazy by working more, because he said you're supposed to look at how in 4 hours can you be more effective, more efficient, more impactful, so that in 4 hours you could do more, make more than you could ever do in 40 hours. So have the actual discipline and put in the work to figure out how to do it in 4, not 40. 40 is lazy. Who couldn't do it in 40? You got 36 extra hours. Of course you can get more done, but a wise person would do it in 4. So same thing with the 150 is a new $1 million, is the fact that if you have to see 1,000 a week to do $1 million, then there's something lazy. There's something inefficient. There's something ineffective that's really not impacting people in the right way. And as I say, there's a loss of integrity to the business. As somebody who's gone on to get his master's and getting my PhD in business, you really look at the integrity of a business. And so almost like the integrity of somebody's soul or any other part of your life or your world, there's an integrity to a business. There's a way it should be getting done. There's a way money should be getting managed. There's a way to train a team member. There's a way to hire somebody properly. And there's a way to work with your patients or outside of chiropractic customers or members or whatever you might have. There's a way to have a more impactful, more effective way of helping them that doesn't require you to have to see hundreds and thousands a week to get to the point of making good money. Just, again, good integrity in your business principles. So as we get into this idea of how do we build a practice like that, it's really simple. If you really look at this 150 a week, when we take a typical corrective care practice, so you're coming in and maybe you're doing the wobble chair, you're doing cervical standing traction, you're getting adjusted, you're going on a Vibe platform and doing head weighting. So effectively, you're going to have these multiple stations. You've got 4 stations. I call it station work. You went station 1, you wobbled. Station 2, cervical traction. Station 3, you got adjusted. Station 4, you stood on a Vibe platform, and possibly a 5th thing occurred, which is you're wearing a head weight. So this is kind of a standard sort of Clear Institute, Pedibond sort of visit. So 4 stations, 5 different services were applied to correct and rehabilitate the spine. So if that's isn't making you $1 million a year at 150 a week, then you're not just generating a value or communicating a value for each of those 5 things. Because if you looked at it and those 5 things averaged out, if you really looked at this number and you said, okay, that was $40 on an average, which would be low, but say $40 on an average, that's a $200 visit. So it wouldn't take a lot of $200 visits to get you to $1 million a year. Now, what's really interesting is you don't need to charge the 200. So even at a moderate volume. So for example, if you were just charging as an average, if you were at 128, 129 a visit, so which means you just took off $70 from that $200 visit. So you gave them a huge break. You'd still at 150 a week be doing $1 million a year. So if you have 150 a week corrective care practice, you should be at $1 million. So for people that think that number sounds kind of excessive, it really isn't. And so just not hard to get there. So now kind of diving into this challenge of converting people into that plan. So I want to talk about 3 things and what I make sure to address. And there's a lot of different components to it. But what I've found, having gone back and forth to my laboratory again in terms of conversion, there's 3 checkpoints that I see doctors are often missing even before getting into the plan. So the first checkpoint revolves around making sure people are actually concerned about the condition. So a lot of times when I'm working with a doctor and I have them either send me an audio or I listen to them doing the report, as they explain the problem doesn't have a lot of value. And so we call this problem-focused care. If I'm going to commit to anything, there's got to be a problem I'm concerned about. So as you explain subluxation, for somebody that really just sees back pain or neck pain or whatever symptom they're having, or somebody looks in an x-ray and isn't real concerned with subluxation, whether that be globally or independently for a vertebra, if you're not that concerned about that and communicate that as a mild issue, then yes, there's not a lot you can charge there. So you better hope there's really good insurance, because people may or may not be willing to crank out a $5 or $10 copayment to come in, a dozen or a few dozen times. That's kind of what you're stuck with. So a lot of people from the insurance era really didn't have to communicate much. Doesn't cost a whole lot to come in here. It hurts, feels better when he adjusts me. And so here's my $5 or $10, and I'll come in for a while. But I've actually seen back when there was good insurance, or when I visited some offices that still have good insurance around them, where people actually are upset that it's $10. And that is a result of there not being enough of a problem. So we call it problem-based care. We have to have established we've got this active degenerative condition called subluxation that not only hurts, but impacts the function of important systems and organs, cells and tissues in your body. It controls all organs, all systems, all healing. And this is breaking down because of the damage subluxation is causing to your nervous system. In fact, that by the time you hurt, there's got to be enough damage established, because most of these nerves are busy controlling organs and functions in your body. Most of the nerves aren't pain sensitive. So by the time you've got enough damage accrued to hurt, we're talking 10, 15, 20 years. And usually you can state that to a patient, go back, and they'll share with you, yeah, I played football in high school. I was in an accident 20 years ago. I was an ice skater. I've been bent over a computer for the last 20 years. That they can tell you, yeah, it's probably 15, 20 years or longer since this problem has occurred. And so we're letting them know. So by the time you're sitting here, I'll ask them, what sort of damage, as we take the x-rays, are we going to see in the spine? Bone spurs, degeneration of the vertebra, disc decay, damage to the spinal cord and nerves. What do you think you'll see when we take this x-ray and put it up? And those you say, yeah, probably a lot of damage. Like, yeah, you've got a lot of damage. And again, it's actively degenerating until you stabilize it and correct it and restore all the healthy biomechanics. This keeps breaking down. So suddenly, the problem is becoming more valuable. It's becoming something that they would be more considerate of correcting again, they're now in the process of awakening. They're awakening the fact that, yeah, I've been ignoring something for a while, and no wonder it's hurting, and it probably is pretty bad. So that, we've established there is a legitimate problem that must be corrected. So that's as we talk about, there's three things in this process. That's the first thing. The second thing I need to ask them is relative to whether or not they understand that if this is left alone, what this becomes, as well as the fact of what it costs. So we've got to do what we also call resetting the anchor number. They got to start to think of the cost of letting this go, both in terms of their health and their life and money, because they're about to make a financial decision. I got to make sure that they understand the money. The other problem is, again, there's a lot of psychology behind this, is that people have what's called a normalcy bias, that if they are just kind of hurting at, say, a grade or a level 7 right now, that if I just ignore it, probably stay a 7, maybe even become a 1 or a 0. Like, just things just tend to become normal and okay again. That's the tendency for people to believe. So I have to help them understand that's not how this works. This thing is active and degenerating. It keeps getting worse. So I'll ask them important questions, and asking, by the way, is, questions are key to awakening. Unless you ask the questions, they don't have to think and wake up. They don't have to cognate. There's no cognition going on or critical thinking, so they stay asleep. So I'll ask them, so given the fact that this has been going on for 10, 15, 20 years, and like you said, there's probably damage and degeneration that's already accrued in your spine that we'll see in your x-rays. If you left this here another few months, I mean, you're hurting already due to all this damage. If we left this here another few months, where would you be? And usually, well, really bad. And that means they're getting it. Okay, yes, it would get worse. Given the fact that it's affecting your organs, that things are deteriorating your spine, if you left it here another 6 months, where would that be? And they'll generally answer, well, much worse than that, or maybe I would need surgery. I'm like, there's no doubt this is headed in that direction. Now, again, given the fact that your spine's degenerating, these nerves are impacting organs, and I'll ask them, like, which organs do you see based on where the problems are being affected? They may say, like, my heart. Like, okay, so you leave this here for another year, where you're going to be? Now, a large portion of the time they'll say, I could be dead. I'm like, well, you could be, but listen, that's why you're here. I'm not going to let that happen to you. And so now we've established, the second thing is that this is actively moving forward, that if we don't stop this, we're going to have a problem. And then I'll ask, and what sort of cost? And this is this big part about, again, this second checkpoint as we move into going over a care plan or moving into an exam. These are 3 checkpoints I'll take people through to open their eyes. What do you think the cost is? So if this did end up with surgery, what is the out-of-pocket expense for a surgery? And usually they don't quite know. I'm like, well, for your neck, your back, these are $50,000, $100,000 surgeries. And by the way, they don't work. Generally, you need to follow up. If you look at any of the research, you need more surgeries, and it's not like you're now back to the life you wanted. There's been some sort of major work done to your spine, which is a really sensitive area, and you wouldn't have fixed the problem. But, what do you think these things cost? And I'll have to help them. $50,000, $100,000. I've got a patient who had spent $1.2 million dealing with surgery and the follow-up surgeries. And then after that, you've got physical therapy, you've got lost work days. I mean, so ultimately the cost of this is many, many times what it would cost here to fix it. But you are talking about, if you left this here, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, even with insurance, still owe 20% of that. So you're still talking $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 out of pocket or more, because some of it isn't covered. So we've established this new anchor number where, this is a lot more expensive than anything that I would charge, and a lot more money than you'd want to spend. So finally, the third piece to this process of people having a revelation is I'll ask them, so let me ask you a question. Are you committed to getting this corrected? And that's really important, because what that'll bring back out is money. So I'll ask this question usually 2 or 3 times throughout the process. So you're really committed to doing this, because it'll bring out if there's still hesitation there. So as I went through 60 different care plans in the last couple of weeks, one thing that really frustrates me and sends me home from the office feeling really bad about myself and what I'm doing is I go through this whole process. We train so hard, me and my team, we're scripted. We go through day one, we bring them back through day two, go through the whole process of showing them x-rays and getting into the care plan. And then they just go, oh, I thought it would be covered, or that's too much money, or you don't understand, I don't have a job. Like, to get to the point where they just balk because of the money and the insurance all the way at the end of all this work, that frustrates me because I let the patient down, because it was annoying because I put in all that work. I just don't want to end up there. And there's really nothing you can do at that point. It's you pitched your whole thing and then you lost at the end. It's just not a good place to find yourself. And then, people are now negotiating sometimes to try to see, well, if it's cheap enough and I offer little enough, maybe I can get them to do something. Just, not a good place to be. So well before that, again, on 2 to 3 different occasions, I'll ask, so are you committed to getting it corrected? And that's where you ferret out what's still left in terms of objections. So often it's, well, it depends how much it costs. And what's interesting about that, as soon as they focus on the cost, no matter how valuable they found the problem, no matter how important it was to solve this, all that goes out the window. You can't think of two things at once, especially money. Money's the thing that will drag you out of all your thought process and get you myopically focused on just the dollars. I've talked to oncologists, and oncologists lose people who have metastasizing terminal cancer, and the person's ready to go. Obviously, they want to stop the metastasis and save their own life. And the doctor goes, okay, well, here's the plan. And they'll say, how much is it? And as an oncologist, you're like, are you really want to negotiate the money? Is that important at this point? But they ask, and he'll say, well, it's $80,000 out of pocket. And they'll, oh, well, that's too expensive. And you got to come in 3 times a week for 6 months. Well, I don't have time to do that. And it just, the oncologist I was talking to, I've talked to a couple, but the last one was just, he says, it just blows me away. And he gets angry and starts kind of yelling at them to try to shake them awake, because he can't believe that despite the fact that you're dying, you're still negotiating costs and time. But that's how the brain works. You bring up money and time, and it doesn't matter if you're going to be dead in 3 days, people still are negotiating it. So that's why I'll ask well in advance of that, are you committed? And often they'll say, well, how much does it cost, or is it covered by my insurance? So I'll always loop them back. I'll say, listen, we're going to go over how we've made this affordable and why we see so many patients here. Obviously, if it was $1 million, we wouldn't see so many people. I'll go over that in a moment, but do you remember what you said? And that's why these other questions were important. Do you remember what you said would happen if you left this here a few more months? And do you remember what you said, what we discussed around what it would cost, not just in terms of your life, but financially? And you have to go back, because they forget that as soon as you get to this issue of money. And then they'll thankfully remember, because I made them say it and I made them think about it early on, and go, yeah, that I would be dead, or that I would be in surgery, and that it could cost $25,000, $100,000. I'm like, yeah, well, ours is not $25,000, $50,000, $100,000. That's not the cost of our plan. Plus, you'll get well. So let me just ask you again, are you committed to your health here in this office and getting this problem corrected? And hopefully at that point they say yes. And I'll ask one more question to get one more yes there is, don't you think your health is worth investing in? And I really want them to consider that. And, because I want them to realize that we're going to get to the end and you're going to find out your insurance didn't pay for much, if anything. So I need them to, some point before jumping in, that they say, yeah, it's worth investing. And I want them to think about real dollars coming out of their pocket to invest in their health. And if they say yes to that, I know I'm in really good shape. The chance of me ending up at the end with nothing left to say, and they've just simply told me I can't afford it, and going home and being depressed at night, I'm avoiding all of that by at least having done the best job that I can do. So listen, integrity of practice. Like, let's get really good at this process of conversion for the sake of people awakening and becoming the best possible them. I don't want to, again, keep running into what I've been running into lately, as I mentioned, where people who never looked into it, never committed to it, find out, wake up one day, they got breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, seem to be running into it all the time and thinking, boy, if we could have got a hold of these people well in advance of the first symptom, well in advance of that diagnosis, well before they started falling apart and going doctor to doctor until somebody finally took a CAT scan and told them they were dying from something. I want to get them well before that crossroad. And the only way to do that is this revelation, making them disciples on the front end. Jesus said that we had all authority. I think it's pretty powerful. He said in Matthew 28:18, all authority has been given to me, and I'm giving it to you to go make disciples. But to make a disciple, to take somebody who's walking a particular course in life and met Noah, converting, transforming their thinking into the right way of thinking to start following Christ, to do that takes authority, takes an awakening, takes a revelation in their mind to make that happen. And that just occurs through just getting really strong, really better, going back to the lab again and again, getting our help to be the best communicator for conversion as you possibly can be. Bless you, and remember who you are.